and welcome to Night Clerk Radio, episode 80, reaching another big round number milestone, thing that totally matters. The first digit swapped, but it also worked out because we're celebrating Ross Payton, who you heard chuckle, his parents' movie shipping. We talked about this a couple episodes ago. Copperhead. We'll talk about it more during the segment, but it's a direct-to-video movie, probably the first, maybe in the early 80s, like 83. As old as I am, basically, and it's been released on Terrorvision. So to celebrate, we're doing the music of Terrorvision, where we'll talk about Copperhead and then the soundtrack for one other movie that was recommended to us by your contact, the guy at Terrorvision, right? That's how we picked this one. Is he was like, yeah, this one's really good, which it is.
Yeah, he did send us the digital recording of it, which is what sort of unusual for them. They basically only do physical release. So I don't have a record player, so I couldn't review it if he sent me the actual record. Yeah,
hard to email you a vinyl. It's true.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think we'll start off, though. I do want to talk about Terrorvision. So they've come up before. Terrorvision did the release of the Unsolved Mysteries music that we reviewed for that episode specifically. And they're just a really cool label company founded by this guy, Ryan Grayface. I hope that's his birth name. I don't think so.
Yeah.
In 2014, where he just realized that a lot of labels weren't putting out like interesting soundtrack music to him. So he founded this label with the idea of putting out physical media, which is both VHS and Blu-rays, because Copperhead's on Blu-ray, and vinyl or cassettes of the associated soundtracks for all kinds of genre films. So mostly horror, but also like sci-fi and what they generally call oddball, which are just like, here's weird moments in time in largely American filmmaking, but like
like their big new release is Linnea Quigley's Horror Workout. Linnea Quigley is one of the top scream queens of 80s horror. If you've seen the Return of the Living Dead, she's the punk who gets naked and dances on top of a tombs. And like
almost every Linnea Quigley movie, but but,
I think it's eaten by zombies. It turned into a zombie. Yeah, so they did not just movies, but the Horror Workout. And they obviously they're doing a Blu-ray re-release of it because they restored it, but they also do the vinyl of it and cassette.
Yeah, and they're definitely one of those shops that I even made the mistake of looking at it today just to see what have they done recently since we last looked. And I just want to buy everything. Like almost every soundtrack they release is something I want, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Like they have the fucking soundtrack for Things. a notorious movie night movie for us in general. Things is famously bad. It's Canadian, low budget. I don't even know if it's
they do.
That.
Yeah,
they do. And
oh my God.
Things is famous because we did it for a movie night on Discord early in the pandemic. So 3 years ago at this point. And out of a starting group of 8 or 9 people, everyone for one reason or another left during the movie, which is very rare, except for a friend of the show, Caleb, his partner, Sarah. And they stayed. So they all have special titles on our movie Discord that they survived Things. The 3 of us were the only ones that made it to the end of the screening. It's famously, you have to be in a certain mood and of a certain temperament to get through it because we are just a bunch of guys with a camcorder in a cabin.
Yeah. It is very much like if they were kids, this would be cute, but they're grown ass adults. That's what they put out to the world. Yeah, no, it's pretty infamous. I think they also did Feeders.
No. Feeders is the Polonia brothers, who are a famous Pennsylvania duo, but it is very much the same energy of we have no budget. Yeah. We spent all our money on a cheap camera.
Yeah, no, Terrorvision is they're doing some very good work in preserving these incredibly obscure movies and soundtracks and bringing them to life once again. So a new generation can appreciate them.
Things is on Tubi, by the way. Just saying if you want to challenge yourself, Things is on Tubi.
Okay, nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Terrorvision is really interesting. My first exposure to them was the Unsolved Mysteries soundtrack, because that was, we did that for the episode. And then sometime in 2020, I contacted a similar company, but Vinegar Syndrome, in hopes of getting them to re-release Copperhead, which we'll be talking about. Brad Henderson, who then worked for Vinegar Syndrome said, oh, well, you know what? There's actually, this is shot on video, and Vinegar Syndrome only does shot on film. So TerraVision, though, is, they're a partner label. We're working with them. They're interested in it. And so he introduced me to Ryan Grayface, and we got, figured out a deal. And since then, Brian Henderson has moved over to work at TerraVision, and they are really gearing up to release a lot of movies on Blu-ray and a lot of soundtracks. And it's a real interesting scene that this has come up in the last maybe 10 years, that this whole renaissance of physical media for boutique labels that are getting these really obscure things that would otherwise just disappear entirely.
Yeah.
These were meant to be, ephemera that, we need to make it for a market, and then no one cares about it. Like, it's just going to disappear. These movies left an impression on people, and here we are.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's founded in 2014, which is like almost perfect timing wise, because I do think since early 2010s, there's been a real revival in this, largely, I think, through YouTube, like the rise of like cult YouTube channels, like Red Letter Media and Your Movie Sucks, and these types of big channels that do feature weird, obscure cult stuff because they're into it, combined with a lot of these things just being put on YouTube. I think for a long time before, Tubi is now kind of the king of trash in some sense, but YouTube was sort of like your bootleg VHS of the time. Like,
oh, sure.
With functionally infinite distribution versus actually having to copy the tape over and over again, of course. So I think there's just been a real boom of interest in these sorts of, we got a fucking Room, the Room biopic. Like, I think there's just a real rise in this, partially because, not that it's cheap, I think it's just easily distributed now. Like, you just share it. You just have such a wider network where it doesn't have to be like, one weird guy in my fucking dormitory quad happens to have a bunch of recordings of some weird sci-fi station in the late 80s because his parents are the only people we knew with cable. You can just go out and find it anywhere.
Yeah. And I think like the charm of this kind of media, these kind of movies, is they're so unlike like mainstream big Hollywood things in a lot of different ways, but most people never see them. They're never exposed to them. They have no idea this stuff exists. And obviously for the majority of them, when they see, they're like, oh, well, who cares? But like, 10, 20% of people are like, what the hell? This is interesting. And they really get into it. And yeah, you're right. I think YouTube was, a vector in spreading this. Like, you send a YouTube link of a goofy scene from a B movie, and like, that's going to, flip a switch in some people's heads. Like, I got to see more of this stuff. This is crazy. This is unlike anything I've seen before. And,
exactly.
And then, of course, they get into it, and then we'll get this prestigious, nice disc with all these extras and lovingly preserved. And how about that soundtrack on vinyl? And here we are. Yeah,
exactly. And I think no matter the reason, I think the other point about TerraVision I wanted to make is that this type of genre preservation is so important. I made the same point when we did Private Suite magazine, and especially Visual Signals, of like, cataloging this stuff is really important. It's very underappreciated. And I am glad that the timing worked out such that they can do what seems to be pretty well as an outsider, do pretty well in such a niche space. So I think it's great. Yeah,
no, I mean, this is stuff that like, film historians don't have. Film historians have the time and energy to preserve like, important, but like minor movies, right? Like art movies and stuff like that. Like there's no one else to like preserve this part of history, and it is history. Like it is, something that was influential and like affected everyone who saw them in some way, I think. And like influenced the tastes of the next generation of filmmakers and artists, and it's important to protect them and preserve them. And I think and it's just fun. Like they're so different from other things. Like, that's the thing, is like, these things, as goofy as they are, especially when you see them 20, 30, 40 years later, they take on a new light, and they stand on their own merits. They are entertaining. Like, especially now we're so inundated with movies that are nothing but CGI and like this slavish following of the, Joseph Campbell here of A Thousand Faces formula that, you have to hit these beats at the, they all start to seem the same. And then you see something absolutely wild and weird and unusual. And you're like, okay, well, this is fun. I'm actually being entertained.
Mm-hmm.
And these would be utterly forgotten if it were not for the work of companies like Terror Vision and Vinegar Syndrome, which are all just like a handful of people. Like even Vinegar Syndrome is like maybe 5 or 10 people, I think. And they have their own YouTube channel, by the way, that they talk about what they have to do to preserve a film. And like, it's very interesting stuff, but that's sort of an aside. But yeah, no, it's really cool. And I'm really glad they do it. And, you know, in the interest of disclosure, I did get, you know, my family has been paid for Copperhead's
re-release. I feel like, it, you know, we'll be explicit because your fucking movie's being released on their label.
Yeah.
A little biased, but also.
Yeah.
It doesn't change what I said, that I think it's important what they do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get into some music, Peyton, unless you got some other.
No, I mean, I'll talk more about Copperhead and stuff like that when we get to that. But yeah.
Yeah. That was the main theme from our first film, Neon Maniacs, which I'm guessing by the smooth jazz, you could guess is a horror film from 1986, directed by Joseph Mangin, who is really more famous as a director of photography than a director himself. He didn't really direct much, but he shot like a ton of the Swamp Thing show and did the Exterminator 2 and the Alligator series. Like he was the DP on all those. Exterminator 2 is especially good because it's that 80s Reagan era, like everybody has to be a vigilante to stop crime, but he has a flamethrower. Oh, yeah. It's a Robert Ginty classic.
You got to send a message, Burke.
Yeah, you got to have a flamethrower. Guns, Charles Bronson and his Wilby or whatever in Death Wish 3. Nah, fuck that. Flamethrower. It was Neon Maniacs was written by Mark Patrick Carducci, who also is really only known for Pumpkinhead, the Lance Henriksen late 80s film. But just kind of highlighting that this is like not necessarily a well-remembered film, but I do have faint memories of seeing it. So it's about there's a group of interdimensional monsters who have like a nest in the Golden Gate Bridge. And they're discovered by a group of high school students who the cops don't believe them that there's monsters in the bridge and they have to deal with it themselves. There's actually, I'm thinking about maybe rewatching it tonight because there's I found out too late. There's a really nice like free HD rip on YouTube. So, cause my memory of it is I know I have faint memories of seeing this like in film school because aforementioned weird guy who has a bunch of bootlegs. That was Doug when I was in film school. And, Doug introduced me to a lot of shit. But I remember, I feel like this, when I was reading about, like, this sounds really familiar, but it may have been under the other name Evil Dead Warriors, or it may not even have a name. It was just on, like, when you used to just record, like, 3 or 4 movies on some LP cassette, you turn the quality down and just record some real dog shit.
Oh,
but I think it was really good, like, gateway horror is what I call it. So other stuff like The Gate or Gremlins, where it's, like, supposed to be scary and tropey and, like, a little violent, but it's not over the top. You don't see, like, people, like, get eviscerated, and it's not overly violent. So it's to get like teens kind of into the genre of horror, kind of these gateway horror is what I call it. But maybe it was a TV edit. That's the other thing. So I'm kind of curious to watch the version on YouTube and see what it's actually like.
Yeah, no, this is a movie I've seen a couple times because I found it on compilation of a bunch of other horror movies. It was also actually riff tracks years ago. But so I looked into it, and apparently this is basically an unfinished movie. This was made over a period of a couple years where they would just get together and shoot a couple scenes at a time. And then they'd, spend months in between shooting days. And so a lot of the stuff had to be rewritten because like Cass would not return to the movie.
One
like,
of those.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of the like if you look on the IMDb page for trivia for this movie, you get things like a lot of sequences in the latter half had to be cut because of the cost of the special effects was just too high. 11 of the 12 cast members refused to come back after 3 months because there was a burden on the special effects team. Like, it's Beautiful. A very tortured production.
I love a troubled production, to be honest.
Oh yeah. And you can see it on the screen, but it's a lot of like costume creature. They all have like a different theme, just menacing teenagers. And it's never really explained if they're from another universe, why is there a samurai guy? Why is there, a punk biker? Like, it's just weird, but it is a fun movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the soundtrack itself is interesting. It was composed by Kendall Rocklord Schmidt, which is a fantastic name, hard to forget. And of course, released on TerraVision, I think this year. It's one of the more recent releases back in February.
For the soundtrack.
Yeah, the soundtrack. Yeah, exactly. And it's like a nice gatefold vinyl with restoration from the original DATs and stuff. It sounds pretty good, but it is interesting. So the way it's structured, and at least the version we got, like the digital version, is like 40 plus tracks, some that are like a few minutes long or maybe up to 4 minutes long, and some that are like 10 seconds long. So it's really like the audio rip almost from the movie. There's lots of those little stings are included, and the track names are all very literal. They describe like scenes in the movie because the first few are Axe the Fisherman and tarot cards, which is the opening scene, like the fisherman kind of before the kids find the monsters, like a fisherman finds them and they kill them. And there's like tarot cards of all the monsters. They all look like Power Ranger rejects.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
They do. They all look like Zed would summon them. But with so many tracks and kind of divided up, instead of going through like, oh, track by track, this track's good, this track's good, this track's good. I kind of have them like in major, what I call food groups. You know, you want to have that soundtrack pyramid. So as you heard from the first sample, a surprising amount of smooth jazz. There's so much for a horror movie. There's
fucking love that smooth jazz,
especially at the beginning where it's like tranquil. But then as things get worse, there are more like actiony and dangerous type parts. And I don't know. I said this on Copperhead too. And I think it's just kind of the style of the time or the technology that was available. I don't know enough about historical music production, much less current music production to comment. But a lot of these like 80s lower budget synth soundtracks have these like do like type 80s arpeggiators, I call them, and like they're really driving. I don't know if it's like the choice in tones or something where they feel like they're moving forward, but you don't really go anywhere. Because like Terminator, I think I just watched Terminator too much as a kid, so I associate that kind of pulsing with like danger. And both soundtracks have that. So you can really tell the parts are like action or dangerous parts. They tend to come up around like kind of the inciting incident is all the kids go to a park to like make out and then the monsters attack them and kill a bunch of them and stuff. There's like that type of music plays there.
Yeah. If you look at the description of the listing on the TerraVision webpage, it says this music was pulled from original DAT tapes.
Right.
So this is 100% like different from like, you know, when you get a Hollywood movie soundtrack, like as an album, right? Like that's actually an adaptation, right? They didn't just like take all the music they produced for that movie and just paste it into a thing, right? Because like a movie would need different cues or stings for like, oh, we need a 10-second version of the main theme because this character walks in through the door. We just need that 10 seconds. You're not going to put that 10 seconds on the track. You're just going to have that main character theme, right? Like this is just work product that has been like, remixed and adapted for a vinyl, like, but very minimally, because this is decades later. The composer's not available, right? So they just have this original work product and they just put it on a vinyl. So yeah, that's why a lot of the tracks are like 30 seconds long, and some are like 4 minutes long because it's whatever the scene needed.
Right,
is my guess.
No, I think that's right. I'd kind of assumed it was more of like a pure preservation work of. This was everything that was in the movie rather than
like, what else is TerraVision going to do? Like they can't like, hire the composer again.
Let's remix everything or like, exactly. Or that's even true. Like reimagine it into more soundtrack friendly sources. Absolutely.
Also like this is like these DAT tapes, like that's what they had to actually make the movie with. They didn't have like, this is back in the 80s when everything was analog. They couldn't like, they didn't, oh, we can't just send you the files and you can, the WAV files for the soundtrack. There's nothing digital about it. So like they just had to play the tape to match the scene as they were going along.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One of the biggest shocks again in film school was moving from like the first editing 101, I'll call it. You do silent films and then you have to do like, you have to actually bring in music and stuff in later.
Yeah.
It sucks. So much hard work. It's so much fucking work. Like complain about like learning a modern nonlinear editor suite. Oh God. Like actually being on at a table is so much worse.
When I went, they'd already phased it out, but like some of the old tape to tape machines were still in the room or like whatever. They hadn't like sent them off to the landfill yet.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh boy, I'm glad I did not have to learn how to use that fucking thing.
Yeah.
Premiere, you said.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of at that transition point too. This was like early 2000s. It's completely unrelated, but they had a flatbed for 16 millimeter. So you shot some stuff on 16 millimeter, especially your first couple of years. But some of the later editing classes were on, they started to do nonlinear editors. I think it was all Avid. And they would be like, here's a bunch of raw footage. I remember one of them was like, it was cutting action. And they just gave us like all the masters for some like 3-second fight from the Highlander TV show, some 3-minute fight. You had to like re-edit the fight and stuff. It's kind of fun. Anyway, totally irrelevant to this. But back to the soundtrack. And then kind of the third food group for me was there's a lot of this ambient, I call it spooky music, which sounds something like this. That's from track 34, Natalie in Hall. These are very literal names of what the character is doing in the scene from which it was ripped.
Oh, those track titles are 100% made up by the TerraVision people. They're just like, this is what's happening in the movie. And this is the music that's playing in there. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But it's this very like synth string patch of the time, like very kind of like tropey tension building type.
It's very in the school of John Carpenter, right? Like, So, big influence on movies of this era for some weird reason. Yeah. No, it's very good stuff.
It is. And there's some tracks that combine both. So it's like the swimming pool scene goes from like smooth jazz to spooky ambient to dangerous music. So, yeah, there's some blending, but there's also lots of weird little bits. So I want to talk about the last track on this album as our last point of discussion, because the movie's interesting, the soundtrack's interesting, but the last track on this is called Tune Up Source.
Yeah.
And I am pretty certain. So there's I think it's like prom because they're high school kids. I have to rewatch the movie to know exactly, but there's like a band scene where like their friend's band is playing. And I feel like this is just like that band getting ready to record. Like, it's just like tuning guitars and like banging drums and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
No, it is. And 100% this is like, again, we found it on the actual source tape, so we're going to put it in here. Like nothing goes to waste.
Nose to tail preservation. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just like noodling, like, what the fuck is this? What is going on? Like, it's an odd way to end an album. But yeah, it's I would like to read those liner notes. We'll have to see if we can get a PDF of that or something.
That would be really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I do. Yeah. Because I want to mention the Ryan Greyface. I found an interview with him and he talks mostly about his punk label Greyface Records, but he also talks about TerraVision. He talks about like the contrast between him like handing out royalties to people at Greyface versus TerraVision. Because like, we had some bands that are really successful at Greyface and they have a breakthrough hit and you send them a gob of cash to someone. You think the reaction would be, thank you for doing a good job. I can make a career out of this. But I never had that happen. It's always been, really? This is it? TerraVision completely flipped that script because you're dealing with composers who were paid $2,000 to $10,000 in 1986 for a score they didn't really give a fuck about, and they were just doing their job. Then they moved on to accounting or some other actual job. So when I approached the composers, offered them a fair amount of money up front with 50-50 on the back end, they're always like, oh, you'll never sell any. There's no chance. Then I always do. I'm always able to pay them back dramatically more than they've ever made for the music previously. They're all so fucking grateful. I'm not suggesting these people have to be grateful to me or anything, but and that's not what I'm dictating, the success or failure. But I tell you what, when you hand someone 35 grand, they say thank you. So that's it. That changes your perspective. And I was thinking about shutting down Greyface because it was then TerraVision changed everything. And that perspective of like this was work. This is work for hire by these composers. They were professional about it and they did like good work, but they weren't passionate about it. Then, decades later, they get more money than they ever expected for just out of the blue, basically. Because I think one of the takeaways for me with this was that like what you feel about the art that you make, what an artist feels about the art that they make has very little connection to the quality of that art and how the audience will actually, like it. We've all heard stories about artists. They poured their life and soul into something and just like nobody gives a shit. Or there's I did this as a fluke and it turns into a major hit. Yeah. Oh, this is just my job. I just did this for work and, for the money and but people fucking love it because a lot of circumstances. So I always find that fascinating, the disconnection between what you think about something you made versus what other people think about it and like how well it does in the greater world. So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Speaking of people thinking about things very differently, let's move on to Copperhead.
That is the opening tension song, the main theme of Copperhead from the Copperhead soundtrack. This is we are listening to the actual digital transfer of the master tapes. So this is before it's been remastered, or there's a rough mix of it according to the files we got, but like it's not done yet as of this recording. It's coming out later this summer. But this is, so that's the main theme. That's what you listen when the movie opens up and it shows a copperhead stalking a mouse, because it's a snake movie. There's a lot of snakes in it.
It's in the title.
It's in the title. It's literally the title. So the synthesized music was made by James Moberly, who actually has his own Wikipedia article. He is a composer of mostly contemporary concert music. He teaches at University of Missouri, Kansas City.
That's right. Professor. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And he has a lot of work for orchestra and string orchestra and for bands. And this was obviously, this was a work for hire thing. And he did really good work on this. He really understood what a horror movie on a synth needed to sound like in 1983. And I can hear it in my head as we speak, even without it playing. I've heard it so many times.
Because you've been forced to watch the movies over and over and over again.
I mean, I did have to rewatch it just to see, like, for the movie transfer, there were like 4 different versions of it that we had master tapes of. And I had to watch all of them in order to see which was the best technical. Yeah, it's a lot of Copperhead. Well, I figured I had to watch all 4 of them at once just to see what the differences were.
I'm just imagining you like that old actress lady in Columbo who watches her own movies. You're just watching 4 versions of a baby you sitting on a picnic table in the Ozarks.
Yeah. 20 years from now, I'll be popping in this Blu-ray and be like, yes, Copperhead. Yes, that was me.
Motorhome from Hell. That was me.
Oh God, yeah, that's in there. There's not going to be a Motorhome from Hell soundtrack because that is entirely stock music. That is entirely royalty-free music. There's nothing original there because I didn't want to deal with that at all. And somebody was volunteering to be, I remember, a composer for Motorhome for Hell, but I didn't want to deal with that. And that guy later went to Hollywood and does music for Family Guy, I think.
Move.
Yeah. So, but, I have a lot to say about Copperhead. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Burke, initially?
Well, I think you know what I think about the movie. Yeah. It's it's an interesting little bit of early 80s direct to VHS. I've only seen it once, though, to be fair. I've only been subjected to it a single time. You showed it for the RPVR Discord.
Yeah.
But the soundtrack itself is like, again, in that spirit of Carpenter of like, this is, I'm guessing at some level, this is what we can afford. And we're going to make the most of it. I also think the restoration process is interesting because like Neon Maniacs, you were saying, is just the DATs just ripped, the soundtrack just ripped off the DATs for the movie. And this is the same thing, right? Like it's restored off. They had the 1/2-inch reels and they had to send it to some company in Chicago that specializes in this sort of restoration. So I think given the circumstances, and I don't know if it was in some Ozark salt mine that whole time or, how it was stored, but it sounds like despite being, 40 years old, that it's held together pretty well. Like the restoration's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was literally in a storage unit for decades. Moved from one, in a cardboard box in a plastic, a plastic container. It was kept in the plastic container, and then I was kept in a cardboard box in a storage unit. I don't even know if it was in our climate controlled storage container, just like
it's baking out in the Ozarks.
Yeah, basically.
But as for the music itself, yeah. I think it's great. It's got more of the, you played the tension song, which has more of what I was talking about with those driving, like 80s danger signified via arpeggiators. I said, I think that I'm curious to hear how this sounds because I did pre-order the vinyl because I knew the soundtrack was pretty interesting. I'm curious to see a little more cleaned up because the versions we have again have like a lot of silence in them. I think like they're just sort of, they're still just the rips. So it needs like a little bit of tightening up. Because like little things get lost. There's lots of little interesting stuff.
Yeah. So because this is obviously again the raw work product that they needed to make the movie, and there's a lot of things that are not like basically sound effects. Like there's a lot of like synth stings that I know that sound. That's the sound when a snake bites somebody. It's like and they have like 10 of those in a row. So it's very good. I do want to play another sample here. So this is the main piano theme, which comes up in the more idyllic, the family driving and look, the happy family. This was actually composed by a different person, Gerald Kemner, who also taught at UMKC. And he, just another composer. Leland's approach was to just go to the local university and go to the music department, hire a couple of, professors there to do the music as work for hire. It worked out really well. But yeah, there is this nice contrast between the very John Carpenter, like very, very aggressive, like synth, suspense, tension music. And then there's like, we're a happy family and this is nice. But there's a couple of times like especially in the second tape where they mix them together, where they have the synth and the piano playing at the same time. It's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have that lullaby thing, which is an interesting choice. I think that's the scene where I'm actually falling to sleep. Like,
Aww.
yeah, it's like the family at night and everything. And we're a happy family.
Until the snakes.
Well, until the evil guy. Well, the spoilers for the movie.
Oh yeah, we don't want to spoil Copperhead.
There is there is a cruelty-free cut of the movie on the Blu-ray, which I have not actually watched yet. So if you don't want to see actual snakes being shot, that would be the one to watch.
Highly recommend the cruelty-free cut. Yeah. Having only seen the cruelty-heavy cut.
It's God, it is really interesting to see, for me, obviously on a personal level, to like these tapes that have been sitting around for decades and actually knowing that there's useful, there's music in there and like it sounds good. And I really want to see the final product now, and listen to it, like how they mix it and how they're going to choose to put it in what order and that kind of thing. Yeah. And there's a couple more synth tracks than I actually remember, because like some of the synth tracks are a little more subtle, like the more, things are a little tense here, not like the snake is coming to get you.
Yeah. There's a lot more. There's more music on here than I remembered from watching the movie, which was really just the kind of the piano theme and the synth theme. Like the lullaby caught me off guard. I was like, I don't remember this at all. And then there's other part that I really liked, but it's very short, is at the end of tape 1, which I think around like 29 minutes on the version that we have currently. Mm-hmm. There's like a little bit of like ambient drone.
Yeah.
That I was like, it's only lasts for like a minute or something. But I was like, I just want an album of this.
Yeah. I kind of want to look up, see what else James Moberly did. See if he was more experimental.
Yeah. It's like after all the snake bite stings, because there's all the little vroom, wom, vroom, zoom. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, they very, very like, I'd love that choice of just
like my little whip zipper toy going pew whenever a snake fucking kills me. Mm-hmm. The other thing I thought was interesting about this, listening to it again, because it's, like a rough mix pulled from the reels, when they actually mixed out in there for how long some of these tracks are. Mm-hmm. Because that opening synth thing is like 11 minutes. It's like the first 11 minutes or something, because it is just the opening of the movie. Like, and stuff like that's interesting because it's not pulled down into like nice, short little bits and pieces. Also made it interesting to listen to, because you kind of realize like, oh, this is still going. Yeah,
I don't remember if I don't think they have. I mean, maybe at the very end in the finale that's what's playing. Because that was a long scene. Mm-hmm. So that's probably where they put. So that's interesting. That's like the finale music, the big.
Yeah.
The final. The final Copperheading.
Snake-frontation.
Snaketation. Yeah. I kind of want to rewatch the movie with the soundtrack to compare and figure out what music went where in the movie. Mm-hmm. I did actually open this up in Adobe Audition to actually like figure out where the music was, because there's the very long silences in it. Mm-hmm. And actually seeing it on the Spectra view is actually really interesting. It's a very clean transfer, it looks like there's not a lot of static or like noise or background.
That company in Chicago whose name I'm blanking on, Mystery Street in Chicago is credited with the audio restoration on their website. Yeah, they did a great job. This is even a preliminary. So that definitely pre-ordered, waiting for that to show up. My Blu-ray of Copperhead is creeping along through the mail. I think it fell off a truck in North Carolina because it just sat in North Carolina for like several days.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But it's back on track now.
Yeah, I just got my copies. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. They really are doing it more than just like as a profitable business. They really do care, because like the Blu-ray release has things like original artwork on the interior of the Blu-ray cover. Like it's this lovingly illustrated picture of snakes and guns, like on the inside of the Blu-ray cover. And it's like, oh man, this fucking looks cool. And there's so much commentary on that thing. We recorded like commentary tracks for Motorhome from Hell and Copperhead, both with my parents and I, and then me and a friend of the podcast, Caleb, and Spencer, formerly of the Mix 6 podcast, to talk about the movie. I don't get any royalties more. I was paid up front for the movie, so I don't. But
you're only mildly compromised right now.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Just slightly. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing. And if you really like physical media, and I think a lot of these soundtracks have just like a couple, like there's this mix of like really interesting original music, like the smooth jazz from Neon Maniacs and like the main synth theme from Copperhead and the piano music, but like, and then just a lot of little like interesting bits of more of sound effects and almost like replacements for Foley work in this. But there's got to be a gem in each of these soundtracks. I'm thinking you just got to find them.
So thank you so much for listening. I think that was a biased but interesting dive. I'm just gonna make fun of you for being sponsored. Yeah, for doing our first sponsored episode. Not really.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Yeah. I'm kidding. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope you go check out Copperhead in some capacity. Go check out Neon Maniacs. Go check out Terrorvision in general if you're a fan of any of that genre horror. Like just scrolling through their list of like Graveyard Shift and Frank Candelara's Brain Damage and stuff, just like so much interesting stuff there if you're into it. I think they're a really great resource. But next episode, we're going to go back to our Vaporwave. We're going to talk about Vaporwave and VR work, including some recent work by R23X and just the general incorporation of like VR elements and art into the aesthetic of Vaporwave over the past couple of years. I think that'll be a little interesting to research because it'll probably be a little more current than I usually am looking to what we're doing. But while you wait for that, if you like what we're doing and you want to hear more, we have a Patreon, Night Clerk Radio at patreon.com. We have monthly bonus episodes, a very, very cool Discord community who has contributed many episode ideas and is a great place for conversation about this type of music. And also some essays, maybe some art sometimes, and just all kinds of other stuff that's in progress. It'll be out at some point. You can also find us Night Clerk Radio pretty much anywhere else. nightclerkradio.com, at Night Clerk Radio on Twitter. Ross is at Ross Payton. I am at Burke McBurkinson. Wherever you do choose to watch or listen to our stuff, take a moment to click some button to let the algorithm know to recommend us to other people. But most importantly, we always advocate, finding community, finding people you like talking to, and sharing your passion with them. So until next time, bye.
Bye.